My name is Hannah Miller, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a nurse, a single mother to an incredible 8-year-old boy named Ethan, and a woman who has always tried to do the right thing. From the outside, my life might seem ordinary, even admirable. I work hard, go to church, and do my best to raise my son with strong values. Part of that included a commitment to tithing, something I was taught since childhood as an essential part of honoring God. Every month, no matter how tight money was, I faithfully gave 10% of my paycheck to the church, believing it was my duty and the key to God's blessings. But as much as I believed I was doing the right thing, I had no idea how much my understanding of faith was about to be turned upside down. Tithing, something I thought was essential to honoring God, may actually be a deception that leads to hell. What I'm about to tell you is not just my story. It's a revelation that has the power to change how you see faith, prayer, and the spiritual battles happening all around us. It began on what seemed like an ordinary day. I had finished another long shift at the hospital, juggling patients and responsibilities, and returned home to Ethan. That evening, I felt an unusual exhaustion, but I brushed it off as just another result of a hectic life. I went to bed, thinking it would pass, but I never expected what came next. In the dead of night, I felt a crushing pain in my chest, like my body was shutting down. Darkness enveloped me, and the world I knew slipped away. I was dying. The thought of leaving Ethan terrified me, but in that moment of fear, something extraordinary happened. Instead of fading into nothingness, I found myself standing in a place I couldn't begin to describe, a realm where time and space felt irrelevant. And then I saw him. Jesus. The one I had prayed to for so many years, the one I thought I understood. His presence was overwhelming yet comforting, radiant yet gentle. When he looked at me, it felt like he could see everything: my joys, my struggles, my doubts, and even the parts of myself I tried to ignore. I wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but his gaze held me in a silence filled with love and truth. And that's when he began to show me the truth I had never seen before. He revealed the unseen world of spiritual warfare and how my prayers, even the simplest, quietest ones, had the power to shake the very foundations of the enemy's kingdom. But he also showed me the places where I had unknowingly given the enemy ground, my fear, my guilt, and my misplaced understanding of faith. What Jesus revealed next shattered me. He showed me how tithing, something I had always believed was an obligation, had been twisted by the enemy into a source of guilt and fear in my life. He revealed how my giving, though well-intentioned, had often been driven by anxiety rather than love. And he showed me the devastating spiritual consequences of this deception. If you've ever questioned why your faith feels heavy, or why the battles in your life seem endless, if you've ever wondered whether your prayers or your giving truly matter, then please stay with me. What I'm about to share could free you from the lies that hold you back and lead you to a truth that will transform your life forever.
Before we dive into this incredible journey, I want to encourage you to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear this powerful message. And if you've had a similar experience, or if you just want to share a prayer, leave a comment below. Let's create a community where we can uplift and support each other on this journey of life. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.
When I opened my eyes, everything was different. The fluorescent lights of the hospital break room had vanished, and I found myself standing in what felt like an entirely new dimension. It was surreal. Everything seemed alive, pulsing with light and energy, though not in any way I could have imagined in my earthly life. Before me stood Jesus, radiating a presence so powerful yet tender, it brought me to my knees. He didn't look like the images in stained glass windows or paintings. His face shone with a light that seemed to reach into my soul. Every doubt, every fear, every question I had carried with me dissolved under his gaze. "Hannah," he said, his voice both commanding and gentle, "I've brought you here to reveal something important, not just for you, but for others. What I'm about to show you will open your eyes to the truth about the tithe and the enemy's schemes." I was speechless, overwhelmed by his presence, but he reached out his hand, lifting me to my feet. "Come," he said, and suddenly we were moving, not walking, not flying, but traveling in a way that transcended my understanding. We stopped in what looked like a massive spiritual battlefield. On one side were fortresses of light, shining and impenetrable. On the other side were dark, shadowy strongholds, twisted and foreboding. I could feel the malevolence radiating from them, and my chest tightened with unease. "These," Jesus explained, "are the enemy's fortresses, strongholds built on lies, greed, and fear. And tithing, as it is often taught, has become one of their greatest weapons." I stared at him in shock. "What do you mean?" I asked. Jesus gestured, and suddenly, scenes from my life unfolded before me, like pages of a book being turned. I saw myself sitting in church, dutifully placing money in the offering plate, even when I could barely afford groceries. I saw moments of guilt and anxiety when I had skipped tithing because of financial strain. I heard echoes of sermons that promised blessings in exchange for my obedience, or worse, warned of curses if I didn't give enough. "These teachings," Jesus said, "are not from me. They are distortions of my truth, designed to manipulate and control. The enemy has twisted what was meant to be an act of love and worship into a tool of bondage." As he spoke, I saw the spiritual ramifications of this deception. The enemy's strongholds grew larger and more menacing, with every act of tithing done out of fear, guilt, or compulsion. Demonic forces celebrated, feeding on the anxiety and confusion these teachings created. "But isn't tithing biblical?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I thought it was what you wanted." Jesus turned to me, his eyes full of understanding. Tithing, as it was given to Israel, was part of the Old Covenant, a system designed to support the priests and the temple. But under the New Covenant, I fulfilled the law. Giving is no longer about percentages or rituals, it's about the heart. I desire offerings given freely, out of love, not obligation. Anything else becomes a foothold for the enemy. He then showed me another scene. This time, I saw believers who gave joyfully, without expectation of return. Their offerings, no matter how small, shone like radiant beams of light, breaking through the darkness and strengthening the fortresses of God's kingdom. Angels moved swiftly in response to these acts of faith, using the resources to accomplish God's will on earth. "But why is the enemy so focused on tithing?" I asked. "Because it's a gateway," Jesus replied. "When people give out of fear or manipulation, it opens the door for the enemy to sow seeds of resentment, doubt, and spiritual fatigue. But when my children give freely and cheerfully, it closes that door and creates blessings that ripple through the spiritual and physical realms." He showed me how the enemy worked tirelessly to perpetuate this deception. I saw demons whispering lies into the ears of pastors and leaders, twisting scripture to serve their agendas. I saw churchgoers weighed down by the guilt of never giving enough, never feeling worthy. And I saw entire communities spiritually drained, their giving motivated by fear instead of faith. One scene hit me particularly hard. I saw myself just a week before my NDE sitting at my kitchen table, agonizing over my budget. Ethan needed new shoes, the rent was due, and my car was acting up again. I had wanted to skip my tithe that month just to get by, but guilt had eaten away at me. God will curse you if you don't give, I had whispered to myself, repeating a sermon I'd heard. So I wrote the check, my heart heavy with dread instead of joy. The spiritual implications of that moment were laid bare before me. My fear and guilt had strengthened the enemy's stronghold in my life, allowing them to steal my peace and cloud my understanding of God's grace. Tears streamed down my face. I didn't know, I said. I thought I was doing the right thing. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. Hannah, my child, I know your heart. I've seen your struggles and your desire to honor me. That's why I've brought you here, to free you from this deception and to equip you to help others. He then showed me the power of prayer in breaking these strongholds. I watched as simple, heartfelt prayers, spoken by believers who sought God's guidance in their giving, caused the enemy's fortresses to crumble. Chains of fear and guilt fell away, replaced by a sense of peace and freedom. Prayer is the key, Jesus said. Before you give, seek me. Ask for wisdom. Let your giving be an act of love, not an obligation. And when you pray, you align yourself with my will, empowering the angels to fight on your behalf. The atmosphere around us grew heavier, and I could feel the tension building. The spiritual battlefield reappeared, but now I was in the midst of it, not as an observer, but as a participant. Jesus stood beside me, his presence both a shield and a guide. Now, Hannah, he said, I want you to see the power of a single, sincere prayer. Watch closely. A vivid scene unfolded before my eyes. I saw a small, elderly woman kneeling by her bedside, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. Her words were simple, almost hesitant, but her faith was unshakable. As she whispered, Lord, let your will be done. A beam of light erupted from her, piercing through the dark strongholds that had surrounded her family for years. Demons scattered, shrieking in terror as the light demolished their carefully constructed fortresses. Angels moved swiftly, carrying the woman's prayer to a greater realm where it resonated, multiplying its impact. I could hardly believe my eyes. One small prayer, a few words spoken in faith, had unleashed a spiritual earthquake. This is the power of prayer, Jesus said. But the enemy works tirelessly to convince my children that their prayers are ineffective or unnecessary. Let me show you more. The battlefield shifted again. This time, I saw a man sitting in a pew, his face marked by doubt and frustration. He had stopped praying because he believed his words were lost in the void. Jesus lifted his hand, and the man's life was laid bare before me. I saw countless instances where his prayers had directly intervened in the lives of his family, friends, and even strangers. Do you see? Jesus asked. The enemy's greatest triumph is convincing my children to remain silent. Every prayer, no matter how small, echoes in eternity. Let me show you how the enemy fights against prayer. Suddenly, I was in the midst of an intense spiritual battle. Dark forces surrounded a young woman who was about to kneel in prayer. I could see them whispering lies into her mind. You're too tired. God won't hear you. This can wait until later. I wanted to shout, to warn her, but Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. Watch, he said. To my relief, the young woman resisted the whispers and began to pray. Her words were halting at first, but as she continued, her voice grew stronger. With each word, light burst forth, pushing back the darkness. Angels appeared, armed with swords of fire, and engaged the demons in a battle that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. This is what happens every time one of my children prays in faith, Jesus said. The enemy knows this, which is why he fights so hard to keep them from praying. But there's more I want you to see. The scene shifted again. I was now standing in what looked like a massive war room. demons gathered around a table strategizing with fervor. "We must keep them distracted," one hissed. "Use busyness, guilt, fear, anything to keep them from praying. If they pray, our plans crumble." Another demon, larger and more commanding, snarled, "Focus on the leaders. Twist their words, corrupt their motives. If we can distort their teachings, the flock will follow." My heart sank as I realized the depth of the enemy's strategies. They weren't random. They were deliberate, targeted attacks meant to erode faith and silence prayer. "But their power is limited," Jesus said, pulling me from the darkness of their schemes. "Watch what happens when my people stand together in prayer." In an instant, I was transported to a church where a small group of believers had gathered to pray. Their hands were joined, their voices united, and their faith unwavering. The light that emanated from them was blinding, forming an impenetrable barrier around their community. Demons tried to break through, but they were repelled by the sheer force of the prayers. "This is why corporate prayer is so vital," Jesus explained. "When my children come together in unity, their prayers create fortresses that the enemy cannot breach. But remember, even a single prayer can have the same power when spoken in faith." The images began to slow, and I felt the weight of what I had witnessed. My heart ached for the countless believers who had been deceived into thinking their prayers didn't matter. I wanted to scream out, to tell them the truth. Jesus turned to me, his expression both serious and compassionate. "There is one more thing I must show you before you return." The scene shifted again, and I saw a vision of myself back on earth, teaching Ethan about giving. We weren't discussing percentages or rules, but rather the joy of blessing others and the importance of listening to God's voice. I saw us praying together, asking God to show us where our giving could make the most impact, and I saw how these simple acts of faith created ripples of light that spread far beyond what we could see. "You are not alone in this battle," Jesus said. "The enemy's deception is widespread, but so is my grace. Tell others what I've shown you. Help them understand the truth about tithing and the freedom that comes from giving with a pure heart." As he spoke, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fear and guilt that had weighed me down for so long began to lift, replaced by a deep peace and a burning desire to share this revelation with others. "Hannah," Jesus said, his voice firm yet full of love, "you are chosen for this task. Go back and tell my people the truth. Show them the power of prayer and the joy of Spirit-led giving. Let them know that I am not a God of fear, but of love, and that every act of faith, no matter how small, shines brighter than the enemy's darkness." With those words, the spiritual realm began to fade, and I felt myself being drawn back to my earthly body. I wasn't the same person who had collapsed in the break room. I had seen the truth, and I knew it was my mission to share it. With those words, the spiritual realm began to fade, and I felt myself being drawn back to my earthly body. The atmosphere of the hospital returned in an instant, the hum of machines, the frantic voices of nurses, and the stark, sterile lights. My chest ached, and my body felt heavy, but I was alive. "She's back!" someone exclaimed. I opened my eyes to see the faces of doctors and nurses hovering over me, their expressions a mix of shock and relief. My first instinct was to speak, but my throat was dry, and the weight of what I had just experienced left me momentarily speechless. Over the next few hours, as I lay in that hospital bed, the memories of what I'd seen in the spiritual realm played over and over in my mind. Every prayer, every battle, every word Jesus spoke was etched into my soul. I knew this was no hallucination or dream. It was a divine encounter meant to change everything, not just for me, but for others as well. The next day, as my strength returned, so did my determination. I couldn't stay silent about what I had witnessed. Jesus' words echoed in my heart, "Go back and tell my people the truth." I knew my mission was clear. It wasn't about condemning others, but about opening their eyes to the incredible power of prayer and Spirit-led giving. I had to share the truth that fear and guilt were tools of the enemy, and that love, faith, and obedience to God's will were the true path to freedom. When I was discharged, I returned home to Ethan. Seeing his face filled me with renewed purpose. That evening, I gathered him close and shared, in simple terms, what had happened. We prayed together, not out of obligation, but with gratitude and joy. For the first time, I felt the lightness and freedom of prayer without fear, and I could see the difference it made in Ethan's eyes, too. In the weeks that followed, I began to share my testimony, first with close friends and family, then with my church. I spoke of the spiritual battles I had seen, the lies of the enemy, and the truth Jesus revealed. People listened with tears in their eyes, many confessing that they too had felt trapped by guilt and fear in their faith. Together we prayed, and I watched as chains of doubt and deception fell away. My life now revolves around spreading this message. I encourage others to seek God's guidance in their giving, to pray boldly and with faith, and to trust that even the smallest acts of obedience carry immense power in the spiritual realm. I've seen how one prayer can shake the heavens, and how one act of love can dismantle the enemy's plans. To anyone who hears my story, I say this: your prayers matter. Your faith matters. Don't let fear or guilt silence your voice. Stand firm, pray boldly, and give with a heart aligned to God. The enemy trembles when you do.